Top the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. You know how you wake up in the night after a party and you think to yourself, surely I didn't say that. I get that feeling sometimes after this programme. Did I really say Michael O'Donnell made his own trousers? Did I really claim Glasgow didn't deserve to be called Glasgow? And did I? Well, no, I must have dreamt it. I couldn't possibly have sung.
I drive a yellow Volvo and wear a new tweed hat. Greenwell is on the doorstep, a spaniel on the mat. There's a bright electric Aga in the kitchen made of pine. And when it comes to restaurants, I never pay much sign. Oh, I send my son to Radley, there are coach lamps by the door. I've a Filipino servant to wax the parquet floor. There are gas logs in the fireplace, there's a coffee table comb. There's a mower that you ride on in our East Grinstead home.
I don't believe that ever happened. And was there really an ad, which I read aloud, which ran, when daughters of vicars wore nondescript knickers, they often got left in the lurch. But now they spend Sundays in Celanese undies. You can't get a seat in the church. Well, it's the sort of thing that makes you feel a bit uneasy round about 3 in the morning. Especially all those facetious things you say about foreigners.
I have a French grandmother.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, now you do. And obviously there are all sorts of genes and things beating around me with French accents. But having gone to an ordinary English school, it's impossible to talk French well, because any boy attempting to say anything in a reasonable French accent, I think, would have been beaten up in the lunch hour, because it was a sure sign of effeminacy. And I've wondered a lot about why that is. And I don't think, for example, German has these overtones. And I think the reason is that when you talk French, if you're going to do it at all properly, you're going to make any of the proper sort of sounds, you have to push your face into directions it doesn't normally go. And there's one dreadful sound in French you have to make, which I won't dare attempt now, which leaves your mouth puckered up as if for a kiss. Now, you can't expect any English schoolboy, or I think probably any English man, to do that without a deep thrill of horror.
I'd just like you could make an attempt at that sound, as you knew I would. You know I'm not the best straight man in the business for nothing. You knew I'd ask. I've asked to do it.
Well, it's the difference between roux and rue.
Lousy. Lousy. Alpha, no, not alpha at all.
You see, it's possible to be regarded as a very smart French speaker without actually being able to speak a word of it, just by adopting certain attitudes. I mean, someone said of me, she can't speak a word, but I like her bottle. And you see, the thing is, one thing you must do is you must say the sound "un" after every remark. That's H-E-I-N. No matter how parlously inept and ungrammatical the remark itself, this will give a suitably garlicky flavour, as does the frequent interpolation of the syllable to denote thinking in French. And you must always address any passerby that you want to ask the way somewhere. You must call them monsieur and madame to sound like a native and enhance generally French street cred, and also do lots of things with your hands. All these things will give the impression that you are a French-speaking
It's very dangerous,
person.
though. You left out the other one. Well, there are 2 other little ones. They just occur to me. You must heavily pronounce the E at the end of a word, as though your French was more or less from the south.
Yes.
C'est à droite. And then
gosh,
you
yes.
also add comma, quoi?
Yes, and don't let's forget zut alors. What the heck does it mean?
I thought
But
that
it's
had
jolly
gone out
useful.
with those Spanish
Really?
galleons
Oh, God.
and windjammers and the like.
You're
No?
making it for me.
Oh, no, never.
But why give in? Why give in at all? You see, if you were educated as badly as I was by the Clergy Orphan Corporation, your knowledge of French is absolutely minimal. I mean, it is absolutely hopeless. I haven't learned French. We were a poor home. I didn't travel. Therefore, I didn't get to understand the language terribly well. I didn't even get it at O level. So I haven't given in since. And I've bought one of those sets to try and learn it, but fortunately work came my way and therefore I couldn't learn it. And I get infuriated when I get these books from these clever authors who will put in foreign language books. If I buy a book, I buy an English book so I can read it and I can understand it.
But
I
how
don't
do you
want-
get on when you're actually on the continent of Europe?
I cut through quickly.
And
I travel
Make
on.
straight for Vladivostok.
Exactly.
Yes.
Cut out France. I always say to the
course.
travel agent, cut out France. Then we can't
It was
have
a
all this
silly
mucking
question,
about.
Roger,
Because
I quite
exactly.
agree.
Well, if you're going to Australia, there's no need to stop there.
There's an odd corollary in the opera world. You know, the opera singers are taught how to sing by means of Italian mostly, because Italian has very pure vowels, and after all, there are quite a lot of rather good operas written in the language. So when they start singing English again, they all do it with this heavy Italian accent. It's quite extraordinary. Tell me, fair ladies. So you all have you have this rather shabby genteel
Which
effect.
language was that?
Well, exactly. It's a sort of Anglo-Italian that is a concomitant of learning how to sing well, and it's one of the things that you have to get rid of when you're singing in English.
I do think, though, we've all shelter behind the fact that we've been set a very bad example. I mean, older people remember the way that Winston Churchill used to slaughter French, whenever he spoke
That was
it.
a great double bluff.
And he probably could speak it quite well, but he was playing up to his audience. And then later on, we had people like Maurice Chevalier and Yvonne Arnaud, great sort of stars in England, who I imagine could both speak English perfectly well, but decided it was much more winsome to do this sort of thing, And whenever you see a French accent on any television commercial now, it's always a rather unctuous Frenchman wooing in a rather unscrupulous way a sort of beaming
But
Englishwoman.
it's very nice the way the Churchill thing spilled back over the Le Manche, or is it La Manche? Quite forget, it doesn't matter. But and de Gaulle started to speak French as though he too were in. Qu'est-ce que c'est le bar? Alors, mes amis. And even, anyone, even Roger would have been able to understand that. I'm sure I've quoted it before. My old friend Arthur Marshall told me that Noel Coward, who was a friend of his, more or less his first visit to France, he didn't know any French, but he was in a shop, and when he came out, he knew there was something you had to say. And this rather endorses the notion that if you say it like an actor or you twang it off, it'll work. And he simply said, aujourd'hui, and departed. It's a good joke. Now, perfect impudence to make game of other languages when you put your foot in it, in your own. I realised I'd never known what the real meaning of the word rodomontade was. And there were others. I heard Roy Jenkins use an old property box word. He spoke of the rodomontade of his political opponents. Fustian word reminds me of Donald Wolfett, but I have to admit I always thought it meant a sort of noisy, tub-thumping, wordy piece of invective or vituperation, and would have gone on thinking that's what it meant if one of my know-all friends hadn't officiously pointed out it meant a sort of noisy boasting or vaunting. From Orlando Furioso, said this chum of mine importantly. Yes, I said, trying to catch up a bit, by Tasso. Oh, no, he said, no, Ariosto. So I pulled a cigar out of his mouth and stuffed it up his nose. But there are words you've never doubted the meaning of, and all the time you'd got it wrong. I wonder if you have any examples yourself.
Well, the word I've got is desultory. Now, that sounds like a
very
grey,
attractive word, that.
rainy afternoon. In fact, as you of course know, it means intermittent, jumping around. And of course, if you understood Latin and Greek, which I on the whole don't, you'd know that. But I think it's one of those words where the air guides you towards, in fact, a correct definition. That's how it sounds, it's how it should be. It's rather like voracious, which sounds noisy, and it's got nothing to do, really, with being greedy. And one more, solecism. Whenever I see that, I think that sounds very wise, because it sounds like a perfectly formed philosophical concept. The idea it actually means an error means nothing to me at all.
Yes, there are two that I've got which are rather like that it's like knowing that thing I before E except after C. I have to say to myself, as soon as the word occurs, no, it means the opposite. And when you say no, it means the opposite, suddenly you can't remember what the positive, what the negative was, and then you suddenly can't say it any longer because you've been thinking. Two such words are enervate, to weaken, which always sounds all the time, first time round, as though it must mean to exhilarate, to set on fire, to get going. And secondly, to secrete. I mean, to secrete must mean, surely, to hide away, whereas, of course, secrete in physiology means to produce by secretion, so that really if you secrete hormones, you actually produce them and send them out. So those two.
The intelligence has a sort of purgative mechanism whereby words that are, ludicrously pretentious and useless, like that, don't stay in our memory. I looked up this morning the word that I brought to the table, because I can neither pronounce nor define it, and it's hegemony, or hegemony. Or I've no idea what I looked it up, and I've got it wrong again. I've no idea
I
what
tell
it
you
means,
a little
especially attached to
I'll
the
tell you a
word
story about it.
cultural.
That is such a common one among social scientists who always want to use this word hegemonic, or that I can remember a cartoon which actually was simply about the pronunciation, the inability of people to manage it. And there is a woman academic standing there, and a male don is handing a bunch of flowers to her, and she is going, "Hegemonies, how lovely."
And in the small hours of the morning, it does seem so unlikely that you found yourself worked up about such things as the Swiss national anthem or the correct pronunciation of longitude. Even yoghurt was debated as though it were the Peace of Westphalia. You hear your own voice fade in. It didn't come as any surprise to me to hear that 5,000 million pots of yoghurt were consumed between Michaelmas and Lammastide. And the appetite, as you well know, for yoghurt is uncontainable. You see crowds outside Sainsbury's hardly able to wait for the lorries to unload the stuff, fresh from the yoghurt vats of Albania. Cows play some part in its manufacture, they tell me. Not the hooves, I think, since they're used for glue. And little did Otto the corpulent second chef realise what an uncontrollable force he was releasing as he magimixed the first consignment that quiet Sunday in faraway Transylvania. Of course, the secret ingredient was invisible. It was goodness. When Otto the Corpulent gave up drinking the blood of virgins and took to yoghurt, he became Otto the Slender, Otto the Good, because, as we know, only very, very lovely people eat yoghurt. They become instantly pure as their lips touch the carton. But speaking for the impure backlash, I say it tastes of sour cream, and I say the hell with it. Where do the rest of you stand, yoghurt-wise?
Well, it does taste of sour cream. That's why they put all the flavourings in it, to disguise its real taste. It became popular the day they started to pollute it with strawberries and apricots and passion fruit. And then the minute they started to pollute the purity, it became popular. Before that, it was something everybody was frightened of because they couldn't spell it. And
or they couldn't pronounce it because a friend of mine said, "Is it yogurt, as in Solihull?" I said, "Well, you want to say Solihull, but it really is Solihull, if you can bring yourself to utter the word." Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's yoghurt, isn't it? Not you.
Well, I always say yoghurt. The thing is, until it got glamorised, and it is being glamorised now, people associated it with Ukrainian peasants who lived to be 143. Or either that, or it seemed like 143. How much truth there was in all that stuff, I don't know. But the pure yoghurt was supposed to induce longevity. But the stuff that's on the market, I don't suppose, got too much resemblance to.
Well,
to the
would
real
you know,
thing.
though? Are you in a position to know?
Well, have you ever tasted the real yoghurt that you grow? That it grows.
Oh dear, that's one of those questions like, have you ever eaten a real potato? It's something
it's like
totally unanswerable.
It's like Quatermash. You eat about 3 cupfuls of it, and tomorrow morning you come down, there's more of it.
Yes.
And and you can't keep pace with it.
I've not only tasted it, I've actually grown it. And it's
you grow it, huh?
Well, if you put it in a warm wardrobe.
That's right. Yeah.
But see, Bob,
he's got 4 wardrobes.
You're just trying to pull
Benny is absolutely
you think
right.
I believe that, don't you?
You really must distinguish between yoghurt and yogurt, as it were. Now, the real stuff, as Benny said, is whey-faced and white. It's a Puritan objection to all junk sweetness. It's
right.
made in airing cupboards, wardrobes, in old sort of pots, and you have to sort of pour off this awful sort of colourless liquid from the top. And then, as you say, Bob, you sort of have pure health, and we all know that pure health is a good thing to have. It doesn't actually taste very nice.
No idea it was grown in wardrobes in Sussex.
I don't know what all this stuff Nicholas is about the warm wardrobe and so on. For goodness sake, Nick, have you never been into Boots, the high street chemist? They sell horrid little plastic and chrome machines for making yoghurt. Making yoghurt is a very middle-class, upwardly mobile activity now, and all you do is put a tiny teaspoonful of sour milk into a little carton.
Sour milk?
Yes, but it doesn't taste like that in the end, because then you add other things to it.
I'm just reading a bit of George Orwell the other day, who's renowned, as we all know, as a sort of saint and the one
he's neurotic about
clear-headed
food.
man.
He's always gone about the smells.
Always going on about food
Always.
cranks, and he said in one passage, one sometimes gets the impression that the mere words socialism or communism draw towards them with magnetic force every fruit juice drinker, nudist, sandal wearer, sex maniac, Quaker, nature cur quack, pacifist and feminist in England. Now, the only thing he left out there was yogurt drinker, because he just couldn't believe that things that he thought were ridiculous could actually be like
Marjorie
other
got
people.
it fairly right about tripe, in Wigan Pier, when he said, they hauled it out of a coal shed and it had thumbprints, dirty black oh dear, I won't go on because it is high tea time after all.
What makes us successful? Envied by our peers. We're the darlings of the squash club, and we've both got good careers. But it's not our habitat sofa, nor our long weekends in Rome. No, it's just that we've realized that upward mobility starts at home. We've got a walk and a Magimix too, and cookbooks written by the brothers Rue. We're young and upwardly mobile. Our midday snack is carrot juice. We've learned to make carob mousse. We're young and upwardly mobile. Pre-cooked food and takeaways, we hate those, unless they're bought at M&S and Waitrose. With homemade pasta, life's divine. Do have a glass of dry white wine, 'cause we're young and upwardly mobile. He's got a BMW, I drive a cabriolet. We windsurf every fortnight and go running every day. Our social life is buzzing, together we're a winner. But this counts as naught unless you get it right when people come to dinner. Our guests arrive no fewer than 6 for a glass of Kier and Bombay mix. They're young, and like us, they're yuppies. We start the meal with tabbouleh, taramasalata, c'est passé, and not for the likes of us yuppies. Our sushi served with chopsticks and with sake, followed up by chicken teriyaki. Be sure to serve celeriac, and you will be invited back by your friends, your equals, the yuppies. Enhance the glory of your food. James Galway softly sets the mood for the young and upwardly mobile. Next, it's time to serve the cheese before dessert. Every ought to please the young and upwardly mobile. The stigma of fruit salad lessens somewhat if made with mangoes, kiwi fruit, and kumquat. Kenyan coffee and sweeties too. Only Bendix bitter mince will do for the young and upwardly mobile. And when it's all over, pray your food with approval meets, 'cause we judge a man by what he eats. Yes, we're young and upwardly mobile.
Yes, you're suddenly awake and remembering how Laurie Taylor showed you his snapshots, all taken with his new automatic camera, and you said they were a series of blurs, all in perfect focus. Oh, dear. But I'd never have dared say anything nasty about Sherlock Holmes. That is on Sarah Harrison's conscience.
Holmes has to be the most deeply resistible character, and I use the term very loosely, in the whole of English fiction. He's a non-character. The other fictional character whom he most resembles is Mr. Spock in Star Trek, with whom I'm sure you're all familiar, who, because he is a Vulcan, can feel no human emotion. I mean, Holmes is just a cold, asexual...
Yeah. Order.
The
Chairman.
whole point about it is that Conan Doyle has felt obliged to dress up this dreadful sort of computer clothed in flesh with all these trimmings and props to make us think that he's a real person. Have you ever seen a character so overburdened with props? The pipe, the hat, the coat, the fiddle, the cocaine, Mrs. Hudson, and even, God help him, poor Dr. Watson, who's always woofling and dear lady away in the background.
Let me say, this is a perfectly authentic position from which a girl might be supposed to view these stories. I think they are boys' stories. Although I have to say my youngest daughter at the age of 13 is sort of avid for them, as I was there. But I think there is an age at which girls don't mind being boys as well. But the Holmes saga is a boys' universe. You started to enumerate all these props. Those are sort of things that boys wouldn't mind having to make them special.
Can I just add something
Do,
about
please.
this? Because I was just about to say that the other thing about this Holmes-Watson, it's a typical sort of bachelor idyll, a sort of British bachelor,
Right.
this cosy room insulated from real life, with this, if you might say, almost the sort of prep school matron figure of Mrs. Hudson, who chastises them
Mrs.
and raps
Hudson.
them over
Mrs.
the knuckles.
Hudson is your mother, who brings up the food and otherwise stays away while you have adventures
I
and
think
fun.
she's a school matron.
And 2221B, if I've got it quite right, is one of those dens. When I say you, I mean me. Used to build in the field next to the recreation ground.
Exactly.
Sarah, I must come back at you about this thing about Holmes having no emotion. It's a terrible thing to say. There's one story where Watson, as so often happens in detective stories, is grazed by a bullet and is temporarily knocked out. And Holmes bends over Watson, and Watson says, "For the first time I saw signs of emotion in my friend's face." And then Watson comes round, and Holmes says to the chap who shot the bullet, "If you'd shot Watson," said, "you wouldn't be standing there now."
You do remember it well.
Sarah, I did, because you see, what Holmes is so British like that. His emotions are expressed very rarely, but when they come out, my God, with what force. And secondly, this nonsense that Sherlock Holmes doesn't exist, because people send these letters to him. And in fact, last Christmas, there's one of these special Christmas books called Letters to Sherlock Holmes. And as I said, he is the person that we so need. We have to actually create him.
Yes.
And Sarah, what Holmes and Watson is about isn't masculine friendship. It's about friendship. Rather like Christopher Robin and Pooh, if you like.
Give over.
Yes, very much. Holmes is Christopher Robin to Watson's Pooh. Or, you like, Rat and Mole. It doesn't matter what sex you are. You look upon this for the perfect symbiotic friendship that's available to all of us of either sex.
Maybe.
Sarah.
One thing I do think that to go back to the stories and perhaps why they appeal is because a great sense of security, because absolutely everything has a rational explanation. The great thing about them is they're very macabre and gothic, aren't they, the Holmes stories? They're never in an ordinary setting. There's always something wonderful. People are sort of throttled by snakes and goodness knows what. And there's always a feeling that supernatural evil is at work. But Holmes will relentlessly bring it down to the cat's hair on the shoe of the maid.
Speckled
and so
Band
on.
is a very good example of that, isn't it? Where something
that.
obviously mysterious turns out to be a poison.
And it makes us feel safe, perhaps.
That is his quality as enchanter, is to make you at once excited but at the same time secure. If you think of Merlin in the T.H. White stories, it's something like that. But I loved the way earlier Nicholas said, and Conan Doyle looked like Watson. Now, he may have seen Conan Doyle, yes, photographs, but he's never seen Watson unless he has seen the incomparable series of B-feature films made in the 40s in which Nigel Bruce played Watson and the unforgettable Rathbone, Basil Nadil, played Holmes. Now, it was a little unfair to expect... I mean, I can't imagine. It's funny, very seldom, that the image, the blank or the imagined face of an imaginary character in your own head is actually filled by a real live human being. But for me, I was a boy at that time, Basil Rathbone was it.
But I would also, of course, as you know, mention the Sidney Paget illustrations, which, of course, is the reason why Rathbone wore the Deerstalker hat, and he's chosen for his general aquiline features. And Watson has been existed as long as a story, as far as pictorial images are concerned. But I really must come back at whoever said that the speckled band makes us feel secure.
Whoever? It was Stephen. He sits by your side.
Of all the stories I've ever read, and I've read it to my children too, it haunted me. I couldn't go to bed for 2 years after reading The Speckled Band.
You've got the bags under your eyes to prove it, too.
Without any feeling of security. The Speckled Band is a different story because it involves animals. I think you're all right with the human beings in Conan Doyle. When he went to something which you couldn't control, like a poisonous snake, it was absolutely terrible.
We're going now. Mind you, I rather hope other people start up in their beds, smitten with remorse for what they said earlier. Laurie, for instance. I said to him, "Your hair's looking lovely tonight." And he said to me, "I wish I could say the same of yours." Rotter. But I don't think any of us need repine over our campaign to preserve the motorbike as a protected species, growing freely in the wild without harmful fertilizers.
I think the nearest thing that we have that helps to explain the glamour and excitement of the motorbike and why it can never be respectable is it is the very closest thing we have to the magnificent battle charger. You don't drive a motorbike, you ride it, don't you? And the man on board in all his protective clothing and his helmet is like a knight. And the girl perched on the back clinging on is the damsel, and all those connotations of danger and excitement and thrill, that they are the exposure, as you say, the exposure to danger. We're saying, the man on the motorbike says, I am a threat to you because I am going fast and I am noisy, and at the same time I'm exposing myself myself to danger because I'm not surrounded by this tin can like the ordinary Monday
Been on a
motorist.
few pillions in your time?
I have
you
been
said?
on one or two pillions in my time.
This is all very
Good lads.
This is all very now-centred. I mean, I think you're absolutely right about the motorbike now, but I can remember something Laurie referred to just now in the 1950s. It was a time of the motorbike and the sidecar. You could not have had a more respectable image. I remember all these people, mortgage-paying, utterly respectable people, going around the countryside, picking wildflowers, sitting in their motorbike combinations. And the other image that comes to mind is the one that you all know perfectly well when you go to France. Very old ladies dressed in black on their motorbikes with the baguettes strapped to the back. I mean, it's in
They order these things quite differently
in France. Yes.
Nicholas is quite right, of course. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on this programme drawing very, very careful distinctions between car owners and Volvo owners. I mean, we've always said that there are very, very different sorts of people to be seen in different types of cars. And Nicholas's reference to the British motorcycle enthusiast, the father of three who rides Triumphs and the BSA and the Royal Enfields and the Brough Superior, the person with the goggles and bell staff, the baggy waterproof clothing, the long scarves, the tin hats covered in leather. That particular person is still there and has been there for years and years and can't simply be absorbed or appropriated into this Hell's Angel, Harley Davidson monster that Bob is producing.
You're quite wrong. I have a point to make there about the Hells Angels and the Harley Davidson and all like that. My point is that the motorbike is the solo instrument. It is the way that the young person roars around the suburb proclaiming that he doesn't give a hoot for his mum, his dad, the world, the universe. And I have a little coda, just a tiny one. Only a wee one, just a teeny weeny one. About the Hells Angels. Do not join those poor, insanitary, bearded has-beens that the press... I'm surprised that Laurie calls them Hells Angels. It's the press that flatter them. Scaly, shuffling Herberts dressed in old rhino skin. I mean, they essentially come together for, as though there was some kind of awful male voice choir. I repeat, it is the heroic solo that the motorbike represents. I have finished.
You're merely emphasising my thesis that, in fact, the motorbike is the most respectable of things. Norman Tebbit, the staunchest upholder of family values in the country, he tells us to get on his bike, and why he tells us to get on our bikes is because he remembers the sidecar, so obviously improvised from a fish kettle and a goldfish bowl, and as thus an example of English family life at its best.
I've woken up regularly for a good number of years, recalling an awful Spoonerism I committed when doing a television profile of Sir Michael Balkan, producer of the Ealing comedies. Well, it was less than a Spoonerism, really. It was more my tongue somehow getting behind my left ear, as Sir Michael sat beside me, all eager for the treat, and I turned to the camera and with awful sincerity said, "Our subject tonight is Sir Michael Balkan. Nor must we forget, as my friend Kevin pointed out, the abiding debt we all owe to the British Broadcoping car station." Now, I thought it was an amazing own goal on the part of ITN to fire one of their newscasters because he committed an occasional Spoonerism. Apparently, the excellent fellow pepped up the news with such wild new concepts as the cross-flannel cherry, and when some footballer was injured, he said he was suffering from a dislocated soldier. This never for one moment confused anybody and added unexpected spice to the factual litany. Wonderful public relations for his employers. How dull of ITN not to spot they had a winner. I dare say the BBC has already snapped him up. The least we can do in his honour is to recall some of the hallowed moments when communication has been transcended, as for instance when the admirable MacDonald Hobley in a dinner jacket was introducing the first ever speech on television by a real live Chancellor of the Exchequer. He'd been lectured on the solemnity of the occasion, and with his face as long as High Wycombe, he duly announced, "Sir Stifford Cracks."
Yes, I really have to give my father-in-law a big credit before I come out with some of these, because he really is ace at spoonerising, and once caused heads to turn in a very select coffee shop by asking for a cup of coffee and a cock rake. And he's also very prone to shrotted pimps and Tarkle treat. And I'm sure you all know that famous and popular old play, beloved of many amateur dramatic societies, Lace-Nicks and Old Arse.
The first requisite of a Spoonerism, it should make sense, however grotesque. I remember a reference to Beethoven's Bird Piano Concerto, and presents the bird piano to our imagination. Obviously, a row of feathered friends, which you hit on the back of the head with a little hammer, by which impelling to sing. But better latter of those remarks you feel ought to make sense, but on analysis they don't, rather like the poetry of George Meredith, and a qualms brought at was certainly one of those. But the third type is when the Spoonerism takes on what you might describe as a sort of sub-Freudian significance, a significance that comes really by mistake, which is much more important than the original word. I remember an occasion when a rather excitable conductor was beginning a session before which there had been a bit of trouble over who was being paid what. And in music you refer to bits of the music by figure A, figure B, figure C, and this man poor fellow, got onto the podium and found himself saying, "Gentlemen, don't let's begin at figure A, let's start straight away with bigger fee."
But I think most of them come out of sheer fear. I know I get words all muddled up when I look at Old Testament lessons and huge names are coming up, and I can't do place names like that, so I say they came from the north and they went to the south. And this is the easiest way of getting rid of all these problems without any complications at all. But you know, the old dear wanting to get somewhere, and she's getting the taxi driver to stop, and in a huge panic, she says, "Stop over there by that flock of bats." And it is just fear that is within her heart. And the poor man, when he hasn't turned up for a lecture for ages, and Laurie ought to know about this sort of thing, you've hissed my mystery lecture.
That is a genuine
Spoonerism.
That's a genuine reproduction Spoonerism.
Well, you only get genuine things from clergy, Robert. You ought to know that.
Yes.
Stephen's references to Freudian slips. I remember in a staff room when we were talking about teaching, and people are trying to, at the end of term, to think of something original to say on reports, and there's nothing original to say. I can remember one man who was sitting there, and he suddenly said, "Good God Almighty," he said, "look what I've written about salmon." And he had a boy called Salmon in one of his classes. It was known that Salmon was rather a pretty boy, and remarks had been made about the prettiness of Salmon from time to time. He'd meant to write orally erratic, and he'd actually written eerily erotic.
There's a genuine Spoonerism, and it's so good that I repeat it. My wife swears that she did hear a BBC man introduce a concert from Bath, saying, in that sort of low humming tone, and now it's Elgar's Enigma variations from the bathroom at Pump. But she said it's true, I don't know. Aha, well, it's all very well to tell other people's jokes. You can't be blamed for them. But is there any midnight perspiration greater than that worked up when you remember the way you stopped the conversation to tell a joke of your own? No, Sue, you've told yours. I only know 2 jokes, and this is one of them. And I think it's the better of the 2. I'm keeping the other one in case I'm in a tight corner ever. And here he comes, and I've written the words down because I'm not very good at telling them. It's about the 2 men going in for a medical to go into the army. Naturally, they don't want to go into the army. And one says, "I think I'll be all right because I've worn a truss for 30 years. And so he went in, had the examination, came out smiling, beaming. And he said, no, turn me down, no good, the truss did it a treat. So the second man said, "Look here, could you see your way to just lending me that truss while I go in, and who knows, I might just drop lucky." Anyway, so he did, lent him the truss. The second man came out, and the first fellow said, because he saw he was looking pretty glum, "What happened?" And he said, "I'm afraid he passed me A1 and more than that. I'm posted to the Middle East." And, "Well, how did that happen?" said the first man. "Well," said the second man, "he simply said to me, if you've been wearing a truss upside down for 30 years, you can ride a camel."
Those excerpts from the Stop the Week Bumper Fun Annual for 1986 were presented by Robert Robinson and featured Benny Green, Sarah Harrison, Stephen Oliver, the Reverend Roger Royal, Milton Schulman, Professor Laurie Taylor, Nicholas Tucker and Dilly Keane. The producer was Mike Hollingworth.